From the magazine, Vanity Fair, October 1997 issue, October 1, 1997. JonBenét Ramsey, Missing Innocence, by Anne Louise Bardock. There really was no place for this searing tragedy in the exemplary lives of John and Patsy Ramsey. Access Graphics had outperformed its best expectations and in 1996 had revenues of $1 billion. Patsy had celebrated more than a year of remission from the cancer which struck her in 1993. She had great plans for her family, her work at the Junior League, and of course, JonBenét's career. The child had already been crowned Little Miss Charlevoix, America's Royale Miss, National Tiny Miss Beauty, and Little Miss Colorado, and had won more than a dozen talent and personality awards. The buzz on the pageant circuit was, "This one's going all the way." John Ramsey had been raised in the middle-class town of Okemos, Michigan. The elder of two sons, he has been described then and now as extremely quiet and reserved. His mother, Mary Jane Bennett, a homemaker, died in the mid-70s. His father, James, was a decorated World War II pilot who ran the Michigan Aeronautics Commission until he retired in 1979. Ethelwyn Gibson, 82, who still lives across the street from the old Ramsey home, says of James, "They always called him Czar Ramsey because he really ran the airport his way." A Ramsey friend who met the elder Ramsey in the mid-80s recalls, "He was very cold, like John was with everybody." At Michigan State University, Ramsey became president of the Theta Chi chapter, and in 1966, he married a college classmate, Lucinda Pash. Following ROTC training, Ramsey spent 2 years in the Navy, stationed at the Subic Bay in the Philippines, while earning his pilot wings. After receiving his master's in marketing in 1971, Ramsey signed up for the management development program at AT&T. Jeff Merrick met him there the same year. When Ramsey was living in Columbus, Ohio, he was extremely quiet, says Merrick, a handsome and gregarious man, adding he could be very charming. In 1973, Ramsey moved his young family to Atlanta and went to work at a computer company. Although he and Merrick drifted apart, they stayed in touch. In 1976, during a visit to Atlanta, Merrick and his then wife stayed with John and Lucinda and their children. Jim Marino met Ramsey on a business trip to Syracuse in the late 70s. "We immediately became friends," says Marino. "He was going through a divorce at the time, but he'd always check in with the kids." However, in his own quiet way, John Ramsey also had an eye for the ladies. According to police reports, his former wife, Lucinda, said it was a romantic liaison with a coworker that was the last straw for her. Although Marino and Ramsey caroused and whored around together, Marino says Ramsey was notably discreet. "You never got much out of him," says Marino. "You wondered what he was all about." Although Ramsey walked away from his first wife with a little more than his clothes in a car, he slowly began to prosper as he worked his way through a series of computer companies. His success, says Marino, was part of his appeal to women. He had money, he drove a Porsche, he dressed nice, but he was shy. However, you could say that whatever he went after, he usually got. In 1978, Marino, after being injured in a motorcycle accident, was confined to a wheelchair for almost a year. "John came and visited me, and he gave me a job," says Marino. "Saved my life." Although the two went to work for different companies in 1980, they remained close friends. In 1979, Ramsey caught a glimpse of a beautiful 22-year-old brunette in Atlanta and pursued her. 2 years earlier, while a journalism major at West Virginia University, Patricia Ann Paul had been crowned Miss West Virginia and had won a talent award for a dramatic reading at the Miss America pageant. Marino, who often double dated with Patsy and Ramsey, said his friend was deeply smitten with her. She was his Jackie Kennedy. In 1980, they were married in Atlanta's Peachtree Presbyterian Church. At 37, Ramsey was 14 years older than Patsy. The couple settled into a modest Cape Cod house in Dunwoody section of Atlanta. Ramsey ran his own company, MicroSouth, from the house. Patsy worked alongside him. After a series of business reversals, Patsy asked her father, Don Paul, a retired Union Carbide engineer, to help her husband's struggling company. Word is, says Merrick, John was going broke and Don bailed him out financially. Although Don and Nedra Paul were able to raise their 3 daughters, Patsy, Patricia, Pam, Pamela, and Polly, Paulette, in the middle-class town of Parkersburg, West Virginia, both had endured hard-scrabble childhoods. Rescued by the GI Bill, Don had obtained a college degree which led to a career at Union Carbide. Nedra saw Don as this great white knight, says Marino. In contrast to her laconic husband, the wiry Nedra was driven and relentless, determined to see that her daughters enjoyed more of the good things in life than she had. Nedra's vehicle for launching them into prosperity was beauty pageants. I did my first pageant when I was a junior in high school, Pam Paul told me. I won Miss Teen of America in 1976. I won the national crown for that, and I won a local county fair contest at the Wood County Fair in 1977, which Patsy also won. In 1983, years after Patsy held the crown, Pam was also Miss West Virginia and a Miss America contestant. Nedra had become a fixture on the pageant circuit. She was involved in the whole Miss America pageant organization when I met them, says Marino. She was one of the coordinators. Jeff Merrick didn't meet Patsy until 1982. He was on a business trip to Atlanta and Ramsey invited him over for dinner. After dinner, we went to a big disco. Patsy and I danced, but John didn't dance with Patsy. In fact, in the 20 years he's known him, Marino has never seen his friend show physical affection. I never saw John hug Patsy or even give her a kiss, even when they were dating, he says. The first time I saw them touch was after the murder, and I saw him hold her hand on TV when they left the church memorial. By the mid-'80s, John Ramsey, working with his father-in-law, was doing well enough to move into a sprawling colonial house in Dunwoody. Patsy saw to it that both of Ramsey's daughters from his first marriage were given coming-out parties. Judith Phillips, an ebullient, attractive photographer, first met Patsy in 1984, when Patsy was working with Phillips' husband's modem development company. In order to be friends with Patsy, you have to accept her family because they are such a big part of her life, especially her mother, says Phillips. Sometimes Nedra was obnoxious and said things that were so out of line and shocking. But the woman is unbelievable in her loyalty toward her daughters. Patsy and Judith Phillips, raising children roughly the same age, were drawn to each other, although there were differences. Patsy was very pro-life, says Phillips. I was a feminist. Patsy was involved in Atlanta's Junior League and a ladies' Who's Lunch charity called Society. And up until the birth of her son, Burke, she worked. Phillips says Patsy had very expensive tastes. She had 18th century artwork and exquisite antiques, and John has very expensive and classic taste when it comes to his clothes. He liked his toys. He has a boat named Miss America and a plane. In 1989, Ramsey merged his company with Boulder-based Access Graphics and another firm. He seized control of the new company, and in 1991, relocated his family to Boulder. Among his new hires were his old friends, Jeff Merrick and Jim Marino. Ramsey then hit the jackpot, selling Access to Lockheed Martin and continuing to run it as president and CEO. Judith Phillips, who had moved to Boulder 3 years earlier, wondered if Patsy would have a hard time making the transition from antebellum capital of the South to a small town full of hippies, Buddhists, and mountain climbers. However, Patsy, now the mother of the 4-year-old Burke and newborn JonBenét, assured her that she was ready to have a different life. Don Paul adapted easily and moved into a company condo on Pearl Street. Nedra Paul, however, made no bones about her feelings concerning Boulder, referring to it as that hellhole. In November 1991, the Ramseys purchased a 6,800 square foot Tudor-style house in one of Boulder's choice neighborhoods for about $500,000. Over the next 2 years, Patsy remodeled and decorated her new home, spending, according to Jim Marino, $700,000. She was thrilled to have the house listed on the Boulder Christmas tour as well as on the home tour. Visitors recall her greeting them at the door with JonBenét and Burke by her side, all of them in matching sweaters. Featured in JonBenét's room were her trophies, sashes, and medals. One visitor said that in the huge master bedroom suite, Patsy's Miss West Virginia dress and her Miss America competition sash were laid out on the bed. Although the Ramseys had been Presbyterians, they joined St. John's Episcopal Church. Social climbing, says Marino, sadly. She wanted to be where the money was. Friends were dropped as well, replaced by attractive, wealthy Boulderites, Marino says. I was never invited to his house. John and I were, let's go get a beer down at the local pub after work. Patsy also redecorated their vacation home in Charlevoix on Lake Michigan. The only time I ever saw John really lose his temper was about Patsy and money, says Marino. He would throw the credit cards on my desk and say, she's going to spend every last penny I make. Jane Stobie, a former manager who began working for Access Graphics in 1990, even before Ramsey took control of the company, characterizes Patsy's spending as Sherman shopping Atlanta. She learned quickly that Patsy, who often planned social functions for the company, did everything on the grandest of scales. We saw the bill for this luncheon in Atlanta that Patsy had arranged, organized around the theme of Gone with the Wind, with actors playing Scarlett and Rhett, and it was over $30,000, maybe $33,000. She adds that the luncheon could have been given for between $5,000 and $10,000. In 1993, Stobie was sent to Atlanta to run the office there and eventually shut it down, even though Nedra, Polly, and Pam Paul were in the payroll. According to numerous ex-employees, Ramsey always delegated firings to others, even when it came to family. My job was to manage Nedra, and really, career-wise, I was hanging myself. Don Paul was there like once a month. He did not want to be in Atlanta, and that was very clear. Nedra was intensely competitive, continues Stobie. She shared a story about how when the girls were running for Miss West Virginia, some woman in the pageant had a ring that was so many carats big, so Nedra had to go out and buy one that was bigger. While I was working there, I got engaged and wore my 1-carat engagement ring down there. The next day, she had to come in with a 4-carat ring, and she said to me, "Yours is a nice starter ring." A woman who worked for me in Georgia said, "These are the meanest people I have ever met." The Paul House, a brick colonial with a circular driveway, was a matter of great pride to Nedra. One investigator described their living room as the shrine room, bedecked with trophies, ribbons, and photographs of their pageant-winning daughters. They were so meshed up in each other, and it was my gut instinct that told me something wasn't right there, says Stobie. They were going on and on about the size of Burke's. You know what? This to me was so bizarre. Nedra's like a little bird, but both Pam and Polly were overweight. There was slim fast everywhere. Patsy, on the other hand, represented real success. "We love spending the money John Ramsey makes," Nedra was fond of telling folks. And when Patsy gave birth in 1990 to a little girl with an angelic face, Nedra was rapturous. Stobie recalls that in 1993, when JonBenét was 2, they were already talking about her in terms of being Miss America. The real tragedy is that this girl did not have a chance. For all her dreamy looks, JonBenét, a combination of John and Bennett, Ramsey's middle name, was not an easy child. They would talk about how incorrigible she was, says Stobie. And at the same time, the she's so cute, she's going to be Miss America thing. What wasn't discussed was the fact that JonBenét was a chronic bedwetter. Linda Hoffman Pugh, the Ramseys' housekeeper, told police that the only housework Patsy Ramsey ever did was to change and wash JonBenét's sheets every day before Hoffman Pugh arrived for work. There was a plastic sheet covering the mattress, Hoffman Pugh explained to me. A former nanny adds that JonBenét wore pull-ups, diaper underwear, during the day. In the 3 years before the child's death, Patsy took her to a pediatrician 30 times. While John Ramsey became increasingly focused on his company's skyrocketing growth, Patsy spent her energy on her daughter's career and on charities and shopping. She organized several of the programs at her children's schools and offered to underwrite her softball league. Mom's Gone Bad, for its first 2 years, she developed a tight-knit circle of well-to-do mothers, including Priscilla White and Barbara Fernie. To the pageant moms, Patsy Ramsey, having been a Miss America contestant, was close to being royalty. One of her most impassioned defenders has been Pamela Griffith, who sewed many of JonBenét's costumes, and whose 19-year-old daughter, Christine, also a pageant winner, coached and babysat JonBenét. Praising Patsy effusively, Griffin cites her generosity and kindness. She says she is baffled by the lawyer's decision to muzzle the Ramseys. I have told Patsy's mom over and over that I wish she would talk. People fall in love with Patsy just talking to her. She is a force to be reckoned with, just like her mother, who is the tiniest little fireball you've ever seen. You don't cross that woman. And Patsy is just like that in defense of her children. The whole notion that John Ramsey could be abusing the child and Patsy covering up for him is almost funny. LaDonna Grigio, another pageant mom whose daughter, Brianne, 9, passed on a Little Miss Colorado crown to JonBenét last year, can't speak highly enough of the Ramseys. Patsy is not your normal, snobby, rich person. End of Part 3.